from the CBS Broadcast Center in Los Angeles, this is CBS 2 News This Morning at 5.
So to mark Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, the Asian Hall of Fame held a virtual discussion tackling hate. The past 2 years, Asians have been targeted and attacked all across the country. Hate crimes against them have reportedly jumped more than 300% nationwide last year. In light of this, the organization invited officials to join Make Hate Crime a Crime LA, that forum today.
People may think, well, he just called me a name, but that needs to be reported because we've had situations where we've recorded hate incidents with an individual that's identified, and then ultimately this person commits a hate crime, and we can use those incidents to get the hate crime enhancement filed with the district attorney.
The Asian Hall of Fame has been around since 2004, elevating cultural unity and multiracial equity for Asians worldwide, and that's something they've been talking a lot about. If you experience any kind of hate, report it, because oftentimes a lot of those go left unreported. So,
Asian Hall of Fame is all about overcoming anti-Asian bias. We do what we do because we like to overcome violence against Asians, discrimination, and prejudice. And we believe that the best way to do that is to elevate significant Asian contributions in the community, in the country, and in the world. So with that in mind, last year when Stop Asian Hate and that movement escalated, a group of us particularly wanted to thank Rostrom Sarkisian, our Vice President of Institutional Development, and our Global Council leaders really wanted to step forward and expand our understanding of our world to beyond glamour and sequence, to really using and galvanizing our influence to make a difference. One of the things that we did as a leading voice of Stop Asian Hate was to create a forum. Congresswoman Judy Chu, who is OSORA inductee, led that movement, and since then we've really focused Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month as an opportunity for us to host these forums. And what were some turning points in your family and in your life that shaped your career and inspired your work today?
Well, you know, my family actually came from the southern part of China to the United States in 1913. So my family's been here for quite a while, and they settled in the Sacramento area. My grandparents had 9 kids. My father was the youngest, and they were farmers. And so when my father met my mother, I grew up in San Jose, California. And I, one of the few Asians even living in that part of town. And I remember my brother and I going to school, and things said to us or happened to us that would actually probably be considered a hate incident now. But I went to college and I graduated with my degree in business, and I kind of worked in the real world for a while at Raytheon and some other places as an internal auditor and a staff accountant. But something inside of me really wanted to do something with my life that really made a contribution to not only society, but the AAPI community, and really help people. And so I ended up joining the San Jose Police Reserves up in San Jose and working my shifts. I worked in the Vietnamese community up there at different events and things like that. And I got such satisfaction out of that versus the job that I was doing. I made the decision to look for a job full time as a police officer. And I happened to end up here in LA because Los Angeles was hiring a lot of police officers at the time. And I found that the last 30 years, I've been able to work so many different assignments up to and including the one that I have right now, where I feel like I really am making a difference, not only in the people that work for me, but the community in general. And, you know, I have Koreatown is solely within my area. I've worked in the Chinatown area. So a lot of these AAPI issues that have come up to the forefront, I feel like, you know, my people and the work we do with the community, we're really able to have an impact on the community.
Now that's fantastic. And Kat, do you have something similar in terms of that story too, of that inspiration to what you're doing today?
I think so. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here on behalf of Attorney General Bonta. I am the daughter and sister of Cambodian refugees. 40 years ago, my family came here to the United States, first settled in the state of Washington, and then moved down to Modesto, California. where I was born and raised. And for my family, being survivors of genocide, the idea of their sacrifice and understanding their sacrifice made me want to honor that in a meaningful way in what I pursued throughout my life. And so I always was very interested in serving others. And it was a matter of honing in on what that meant for me. And when I went to school at UC Davis, my very first class was an Asian American Studies class. And it was with Professor Bill Hing. And at the time, Professor Hing was working, he was one of the first scholars and lawyers to work on the issue of deportation of Cambodian Americans. And through that, I understood more about the impact of our legal system, the impact of our policy making on our daily lives. And so through that, I wanted to pursue. I first wanted to pursue a legal career, actually, but that didn't quite work out. But I'm here at the Department of Justice now, leading an office of community engagement and outreach. And, I'm one of the few non-attorneys that gets to work here. But, I do appreciate that there is this intentionality around having community voices at the table, which is what motivated me to pursue policy and to pursue being in this position and in this field to ensure that these voices and these communities are present.
So my journey, it did for me start in New York, but I was the grandchild of Irish immigrants, and I lived in my grandparents' house, grew up in their home. They came to America to fulfill their dreams for their grandchildren and children. And I think I like to hope that I helped fulfill their dreams for what they saw for their children. But, living with my grandparents who were immigrants and had their own challenges being Irish and immigrants and speaking with a very thick brogue, so thick many people didn't understand them, and so thick that I actually grew up speaking with a very thick brogue and didn't realize it till I went to school, that I saw how they were treated so differently. Even in New York, which is so incredibly diverse today, the Irish were treated very differently. And seeing that, particularly at a very young age, had a huge impact on me. I saw how these people who I adored were treated so poorly, and it heightened my awareness about inequities in our system and really inspired me to think about becoming a lawyer. I am the first lawyer, the only lawyer to date in my family, working on my children, but I can see that will not be successful. But I saw in the law the opportunity to try and make some fundamental changes. And that's why I studied the law, learned about it. And then even as a lawyer, I learned so much more about the inequities and the inequities women have faced in this profession. I work with women lawyers in Los Angeles on their history project to chronicle the pioneers in our profession, the women pioneers, and learned about the tremendous inequities that they face and still face to a large degree. So that further inspired me in my career in public service to work for the city of Los Angeles as deputy mayor, to work as a federal prosecutor for almost 17 years, becoming the U.S. attorney. And as U.S. attorney, I was able to really staff up our civil rights division and create in the civil division a civil rights section that didn't previously exist to try to help address some of those inequities. But I think, if you ask me what really inspired me, it was what I saw as a young child in how my grandparents, who work so hard every day, how they were treated, and to try to ensure that we make that effective change for everyone, so that we do have that, we can all fulfill our the dreams of our ancestors in coming to America and living that American dream.
What are the causes of hate crimes and hate incidents, as you feel, that are really driving the trends in our community?
You know, some people do want to say the media is overblowing it. I do not believe that. I believe our society now with social media and everybody having phone cameras, maybe we're just seeing what was already there. I think the personal stories of all the panelists, and I'm sure of many of the listeners, if we could all have had that ability to document our stories over the years, I think we would have seen this has been a long time trend, or maybe a part of our society that maybe we didn't want to examine so closely. And now we have that opportunity to really dive in and bring to light these, you know, whether it's a hate crime incident or a hate incident or a hate crime, to bring to light that this is happening and try finally to get a grip on it and stop it. And it's very challenging in a world where we seem to be living in a world where everybody feels free to express these opinions and ideas, regardless of how hurtful they may be. And some leaders have, you know, encouraged that to happen. And it's not just unfortunate, it's traumatizing to many people. And so the trends, I don't think they're overblown. I think we're finally getting more of an accurate view of what's been happening to different groups throughout our society. I did, you know, review some federal statistics, and we can see that and they're only available to 2020. The 2021 stats are not out yet, but from 2019 to 2021, on a federal level, there's more than 1,000 federal crimes that the FBI is reporting took place around our nation. So it's up to about over 8,000 throughout our nation from the previous year, 7,000. And I can tell you that that's a gross underreporting of those crimes. I think we all know that to be true. But the problem is it is an underreported crime, whether that's based on shame or wanting the matter to go away, or whatever the reasons are. Historically, there have always been crimes, particularly crimes that are very personal and hurtful, that are underreported. And I'm hopeful with this greater awareness, these public awareness campaigns that are taking place, that the public will feel greater confidence in coming forward, that something will happen with their report, and that we need to be sure that every one of these incidents is counted. Everyone matters. And it's the only way we can get accountability for those crimes is if people come forward. So I am seeing the trend going up. The causes, I'm not a social scientist, but it does seem that people are feeling more free to commit these crimes, which is a sad statement on our society.
You know, that really brings me to Deputy Chief Chow in terms of the severity and the trends and the causes. What are your thoughts there? Because a lot of people say, hey, maybe it's because some political statements fired up people's thoughts and they're just more aggressive and feeling that they can express themselves, which I do think is a big part of it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's the economy. Whenever we see a downturn in the economy, we see a rise in hate crimes, loss of jobs, perhaps. Maybe that's a part of it. Or maybe it's just always been there and we're just seeing more of it now. What are your thoughts there for our audience?
It's a combination of everything that has been mentioned. I agree with the commissioner. Everybody that is in this country right now had a family member that came over here or that was here before, and everybody has a family member that was treated differently because of who they are. This has been something that's been ingrained into American history going really far back. I know my grandparents saw that. I saw it as a kid. My parents saw it. But as far as the causes of hate crimes and hate incidents in Los Angeles, I think there's a couple things. Number one, I do believe social media has played a part, because there have always been people out there that had these tendencies to prejudice against others. But the social media has allowed those people to kind of group together and have opinions come up and things like that, which I think has emboldened them. Also, I do believe there was a political climate at one time where a lot of hate groups felt emboldened. And so we saw a lot of acting out. And as far as the AAPI hate crimes, then you add COVID into it. Because when COVID first came over here in early 2020, as you remember, there were a lot of people were blaming it, people that just looked Asian for bringing the virus over. And so we saw a very, very big spike in AAPI hate crimes during that year. Now, the statistics are interesting, but I do believe, as Commissioner mentioned, we're severely underreported in a city of 4 million people. So the 4-year trend for hate crimes, in 2018, there were 6 reported hate crimes, AAPI. In 2019, there were 8 reported. In 2020, 25. In 2021, 39. That's a big percentage jump, but the sheer numbers mean that people are not reporting what they're seeing. So I believe that, a lot, the trend is accurate, but I believe the numbers are not. So there's still a lot of work to do to get people to report. But really, the thing that we have to do is work with our community-based organizations, work with our legislature, work with our judicial system. We need to really educate the community and prevent these things from happening in the first place. Because until society really takes a stand that hate crime and hate incidents are not acceptable, the problem will not go away.
The Attorney General has said that in recent, and this is a quote, in recent years, our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities haven't only been hit by the pandemic of COVID-19, but we've also been hit by a pandemic of hate. And that was fueled from the top on down by the rhetoric of misguided politicians and leaders. And indeed, we've all seen the news reports, the videos, as mentioned before, of our elders being assaulted, our daughters being murdered, loved ones attacked. And the data also reflect this unacceptable reality. According to the most recent data released by our office, we've seen alarming trends. Here in California, hate crime events increased by 31% in 2020. And here in LA, it was an 80% increase. There were 366 hate crime events in LA, the highest number in at least a decade. And across the state, anti-Asian hate crimes anti-Asian hate crime events increased by 107%. The data is very disturbing, it's upsetting, and worse, that's not exhaustive. As you know, both panelists have mentioned and emphasized, for many communities, incidents of hate often go underreported. And tackling this crisis is a priority for the California Department of Justice. Our communities feel so much pain right now. We owe it to them to take action, and we must stand side by side with communities, with one another, to identify solutions and to work together. Here at the Department of Justice, we have been laser focused on supporting victims and survivors of crime. And that's why the Attorney General has done a few things. He formed the Racial Justice Bureau early on when he took office. He also issued new guidance and resources to help the public and law enforcement better understand and address hate crimes. He also urged prosecutors statewide to establish specialized hate crimes units with a focus on building up direct engagement with the community. He also launched my office, the Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement. And the intention there is to directly engage with and respond to the needs of communities. And the AG is traveling statewide for a series of convenings to discuss the rise of hate crimes and hear directly from communities on how the Department of Justice can be a better partner to address hate crimes at their roots and bias at their roots. And our hate crimes brochure that we make available on our website is also translated in over 20 different languages. These efforts at the state level, along with the incredible work being done at the local level that you're hearing about today, by cities and community organizations will guide that path ahead as we work together to build a future where incidents of hate are prevented from ever occurring.
That's very encouraging that the state is taking such a strong stance that hate is not okay. And I love the way that the office is plowing forward in all of these campaigns and in all of these statements. Commissioner Decker, do you feel that there are tangible things that could be done to deter crime and to also follow in parallel to what the state is doing? And from your former experience as a former U.S. attorney.
Yeah, I do. I do think there's much more we can all do. I don't think it's one avenue. It has to all come together collaboratively, much like Kat said when she's talking about the state proposal. You know, in Los Angeles, you mentioned the campaign that LA is for everyone. I think it was a good campaign and successful in that it brought greater awareness, both awareness to the community that the city cares. And I think just as a leadership issue, that has to be stated through the campaign and far more. But also it's important for victims to understand that people care about this. When you talked earlier about people not wanting to come forward, on one hand, I understand that, right? I've worked with a lot of victims over my career. It's very hard and it's very personal. And sometimes you just want it to go away and move on, right? But we need those victims to understand they are victims, that something happened to them that shouldn't have happened. And sometimes talking about it will help them move on. But also there should be some accountability. And I'm not saying, you know, if something happens on the schoolyard, that child should get expelled, or, you know, we're just talking about ensuring that the child who did that doesn't grow up to be an adult who does that. Or start to think that that behavior is appropriate. And so getting victims to feel comfortable to come forward is important, but it's also simultaneously a challenge. It's a challenge because not every incident is a crime. Not every incident can be prosecuted, right? It's actually very difficult. You not just have to prove the crime, but you have to prove it was motivated by a bias based on race, ethnicity, religion, gender identity. I mean, there are a handful of reasons, but it's hard to prove a person's motivation. So victims can often be disappointed that what happened to them is not perhaps prosecuted as a hate crime. So I think we do need to be honest to the public about what can be done, but also at the same time, and the challenge is encouraging them to come forward, because we have to identify those incidents that are happening. We need to be able to understand and use the data to know which communities do we have to really increase the education and the outreach to ensure potential victims are aware what's happening in their community so they can take precautions, but also highlight to people who perhaps intend to commit those crimes that it is not acceptable, and we're aware of it and working on it. It is a challenge, but I think we all have to be in it together in terms of a public awareness campaign, police officers counting incidents in addition to crime, as LAPD is doing, and I'm sure the chief will talk about, but also being realistic and very clear about what can happen later. While making everyone feel valued. And that is the challenge, Maki. That's the challenge in encouraging anyone to come forward when they've had a crime happen to them or an incident that is very personal and hurtful. It's sometimes easier just not to report. So we're facing a big challenge, but it's so important for all of us to be on top of it.
So Eileen, you've given me a lot to think about, because the question most Asians would have, now we're going back to AAPI, is, hey, if I report it and it doesn't really move the needle from me and my community and my family, then it's kind of a waste. So I'm not going to do it. I mean, in Mandarin, there is a phrase called 自己找麻烦, which means I'm just creating trouble for myself and I'm just not going to do it. And that so many people just decide that they're not going to go there. Another Chinese phrase is 散开, which is we're just going to let it dissipate. If I just let it go, it'll be fine.
And
Why reporting? It's really important because I think the problem with Asian culture is we're very results oriented. So if we report it, we want to see some kind of retribution. It's like a revenge. But if there's no revenge and we're not going to do, what are your thoughts there?
So understand that, right? I understand that completely. But particularly like with LAPD, where they're reporting or collecting information on incidents and crimes, everybody's being counted. Fundamentally, everybody's being counted. And then when I get the data, right, I have a chart here that I don't think you'll be able to see, right? But I'm watching the incidents by division. I'm watching the crimes by division, so that we as a city and chief that I know the chief will be talking about, know where this is happening, know where to focus their resources. No incident is going uncounted and unreported. Now, you may not see it go to court, right? But it matters that we know where this is happening so that resources can be targeted, education can be targeted to the communities that need it most, to be sure this isn't happening to other people. And so it all counts. It all matters. When I talked about the federal reporting earlier, those numbers I know are just so undercounted. Federal resources are directed to communities based on data, based on reporting. We need to know where this is happening so we can get the resources and bring the education and the resources and the law enforcement resources when necessary, based on the data. And if people aren't reporting, then we're guessing. We're sitting here saying, we know there's more.
That question, it's a great question. And, actually everything that we've talked about really needs to be coordinated. If you look at, if you look at the way I believe we have to combat hate crime and hate incidents, it's a combination of many things. Number one, education. Education is going to get people understanding how to report and what a hate crime is and what a hate incident is. And the reason we need to know about hate incidents, people may think, well, he just called me a name, but that needs to be reported, because we've had situations where we've recorded hate incidents with an individual that's identified, and then ultimately this person commits a hate crime, and we can use those incidents to get the hate crime enhancement filed with the district attorney. But also education for the general community. This is where the Hall of Fame can come in. We need to communicate to society that, when you're out and about and you see these things happening, that's not acceptable. And so even if that victim is reluctant to report, we still need people out there to say, that's not acceptable, and I'm going to report it, and I'm going to take a cell phone video, or I'm going to give information about a suspect. Because as the commissioner pointed out, we need to know where things are happening, and we do break it down by division. So I know in within the city where most of the hate crimes, hate incidents are occurring. So as you would expect, a lot of them are in the Olympic Division because of Koreatown. There's some up in Chinatown, and then for the Jewish community, they're in like Wilshire and West LA. So we look at that because that's where we need to focus our education campaigns. The education campaigns need to be a very concerted effort between community-based organizations, the city, as we were a very big part of the LA for All campaign, LAPD was, as well as law enforcement and our prosecutors from the Attorney General's office, as well as the DA, to really make sure that we're coming and attacking this problem from a holistic approach. And then, of course, there's prosecution. Once we identify somebody, it's really important that we get the information we need so that we can go to the district attorney, get charges filed, and then add the hate crime, enhancement. But again, like I believe that it's really a holistic approach that we all have to take, because I think you're absolutely right. As far as it goes to the AAPI community, when I made captain way back in 2003, that cultural issue about, number one, not wanting to report it because it's not going to impact, or it's not going to affect me. But we have a bigger societal program that we have to educate people that we need to know about it, even though this one incident may have impacted you. But that also goes off, that plays a role in reporting other things that affect the AAPI community to either city government or law enforcement where they don't report. And then of course there's always the element of distrust of the police. It's out there. And so what we've been working with not only LAPD, we still are taking reports. So people can call 911. We'll send an officer out there to do an investigation, not just to record it, but we also have services that come along with it. So we can refer them to, different types of services. But we're working on a program right now to kind of combine that reporting element with the city's 311, 211 system. So people have the opportunity to call the city and report something if they don't really want contact with a police officer. So once we are able to merge that data, I think we'll start getting a real clearer picture about kind of what's happening in the city as far as hate crimes and hate incidents.
Well, what are the existing campaigns now? And maybe this is part of our post-forum conversation. And what are the things that we can do to help? Maybe it's a QR code that they immediately scan. Maybe that's what Hall of Fame helps in terms of our Make Hate Crime a Crime initiative. What are some of your thoughts there? What we can do to help?
Well, very good question. Thank you. We have, when we engage in the LA for All campaign with Capri Maddox's department, we actually came out of there producing hate crime cards that we can hand out to community members that are in Cantonese, Mandarin, Japanese, Korean. So that's the one thing that we need to do. We need to really educate people about how to report, why to report, but again, like more importantly, educate society about that these things are not acceptable. We do have a hate crimes coordinator that works out of robbery homicide division, is Detective Orlando Martinez, and he's the one that keeps all the statistics, but he's available to come out and do education seminars with community groups, schools, children, because a lot of this is going to really have an impact if we can reach the young kids that are growing up. Just like everything else, that we try to impact in society, you have to educate the young kids. So we have that. Every single one of our divisions has community relations units that can come out and do education for kids or community organizations about how to report, what to look for, those types of things.
That's fantastic. I really would love to hear more. It sounds like you're a very busy man keeping our city safe. And Director New, I would love to hear more about how the Attorney General's office see the role of community organizations as a vehicle and partner in helping to reduce hate crimes and incidences around California and locally. What are your thoughts there in terms of what the office views as a critical partner? In other words, how can we be a better partner to your office?
I would say that community organizations are absolutely critical. They're the ones on the ground. They're the ones that a lot of times that's how we know that these hate crimes and hate incidents are going underreported, because we're hearing anecdotally that these things are happening. And, it could be because of shame. It could be because of mistrust of law enforcement, but that's where our community organizations are able to help us to bridge that, to help to build trust, to help to inspire confidence in the system, so that when they do go to law enforcement and they are reporting these, that they feel comfortable doing so. And that they, that the person maybe, not speak the language or may not, look like them, so they're not feeling comfortable. But those community organizations can really help to educate and build that bridge. And, so I think that those of us in government and law enforcement as well can support these efforts on the ground. We can listen, we can show up for these marginalized communities. We can partner with them to prevent crime. And because fighting crime happens at every level, and we all have a role to play. So, like I said before, that's why here at the Department of Justice, we launched the Racial Justice Bureau to step up our outreach with community organizations and law enforcement on hate crime prevention, information sharing, and reporting. That's why we launched this Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement to directly engage and respond to the needs of our communities. And that's why the Attorney General is going across the state to meet with communities directly and community organizations on how the Department of Justice can be a better partner to address these hate crimes and bias at their roots. So we understand that there's no single solution, there's no panacea here. But what is certain is that it's going to take all of us to do our part, and that's absolutely including our local community organizations.
So I have a stupid question, Kat.
No question is stupid.
If I come up with this brilliant idea and public awareness thing and something that helps LA and something helps local communities, but also can help California, would that be something that would be interesting to your office for me to present to you and say, we've got this idea that maybe we can partner or work in conjunction with you and making our community stronger? Would you be interested in hearing about it?
Yeah, like I said, I think this is the time to explore all options, seeing what works. And, it takes all of us to really create and brainstorm together to help keep our community safe.
To pick up on something Kat said, now is the time. Like, everybody wants to make this better. Everybody wants to affect change at every level of government. The chief gave you the name of a local coordinator at LAPD. Kat's office is willing to cooperate. On the federal level, just yesterday, all of the civil rights coordinators from U.S. attorneys' offices all around the country got together in a virtual conference, and focused together on what more they can do to help their communities, the AAPI communities, in addressing hate crimes very specifically. And by the way, here in LA, the coordinator's name is Mac Jenkins, and he said I could say his name for coordination purposes, but all around the country, every district has their Matt Jenkins, right? Who's willing to work with you, willing to come out, willing to coordinate with local law enforcement, like the chief indicated, like the state DOJ, as Kat indicated. Now is the time. And I encourage everyone to bring together those collaborative efforts, because we must work harder on prevention, which, as others have said, requires education, the use of the influencers to tell the community we care. Everybody cares about this. Everybody's voice matters. To increase education about what can happen, how to protect themselves as a victim while never at fault, but just simple things people can do to protect themselves from becoming a victim, but also that if they do, we want them to feel comfortable coming forward, because their voice does matter. And we really have to get across to people that their voices do matter. Every incident matters to us. And we must give better access to all the information. I think the chief talked about early education. We got to get into those schools. Children influence adults perhaps more than anyone. And if we can get to the children even more, I think that would be great. And of course, as a former prosecutor, I have to say accountability, that there must be accountability for hate crimes. And I know that there are teams of prosecutors at every level of government who are very focused on this issue and want to help their own communities in addressing this. But to do that, we have to have people come forward. And so that's why all the other issues we talked about today are so important on prevention, awareness, access, education. To get that accountability, to really change things, we have to have the whole package.
Commissioner Decker, thank you so much for wrapping that up for us. That really gives us a lot of food for thought. I know all of our viewers today are so grateful for your expertise, and for Director New and also Deputy Chief Chow. Thank you so much for joining our forum, our second annual Policy Forum series, this year focusing on hate crime. And I have a feeling we're going to be focusing on hate crimes for quite a while. Unfortunately.